Okay, we're learning the Maimer Vayedaber Elokim from Shavuos Tafshin Chavtes 1969, and the Maimer is based on a Maimer of the Rebbe Marash. Obviously, the Rebbe takes it to a whole other place, as we will find, but it's based on a Maimer that the Rebbe Marash said exactly 100 years earlier on Shavuos of 1869. Tafresh Chavtes. Okay, so we're holding chapter 3, but just let's review what we said till now. So we began the Maimer by, there's a whole, look at that, look at that, okay. A bigger crowd today, look at that. Okay, great. So we asked the question, Vayedaber Elokim is called Dvarim Eila Leimer, that the Aseret HaDibros, the Ten Commandments, are introduced with the verse that God spoke all these things, Leimer, saying. That's generally how we translate the word Leimer. And the question that's asked, commentaries all ask, what is the meaning of the word Leimer here? Why does the word Leimer appear here? Usually, when it says Leimer, when it's, the most common usage of it in the Torah is Vayedaber Hashem al Moshe Leimer. God speaks to Moshe Leimer. What does Leimer mean? Tells Moshe to repeat it to Aaron, to his children, to the Jewish people, and so on. So Leimer means to repeat what's being said. So God speaks only to Moshe, and then, or sometimes to Moshe and Aaron, and so on. And then the idea is Leimer, you repeat it to somebody else. But here we know that all the Jewish people were at Mount Sinai. Not only all the Jewish people were there that were living at the time were at Mount Sinai and heard God speak directly to them, but all the souls of all the future generations were also at Mount Sinai. So if so, why does it say the word Leimer? Who does it have to be repeated to? Who's missing that this needs to be Leimered to, that it has to be repeated to? That's the question. So the Rebbe goes on to explain 3 interpretations of the word Leimer, 3 meanings of the word Leimer. 2 meanings of the word as they would apply here, the way we generally translate them as Leimer, and then a 3rd interpretation. The first 2 are that the word Leimer, which means generally to repeat. So here, in this context, it means it also means to repeat, except that here we're not talking about repeating God's words to somebody else that wasn't present to hear them, since, as we mentioned, everybody was there. But Leimer means that a Jew studies Torah, and when he studies Torah, he causes Leimer, he causes that God should Leimer, God should repeat what he says. That when a person studies Torah, so the Eibishter, God is God sits opposite him and studies with him, and God repeats the things that the person says. That's one interpretation of Leimer. Another interpretation of Leimer is that the Yid repeats what God says. That when a Jew learns Torah, so it's Tan L'Sheni Imra Secha, like the verse in Psalms, that we repeat what he's saying, that it's Imra Secha. God is saying, God is learning Torah, and we're repeating what he's saying. So we see the word Leimer means to repeat. The question is it, one interpretation is that God repeating what we say, the other interpretation is that we repeat what God says. Okay, those are 2 interpretations of Leimer. The third one is that you look at the pasuk, Vayedaber Elokim is called Dvarim Eila Leimer. It starts with Vayedaber, ends with Leimer, to speak and to repeat. So Vayedaber, that's the Aseret HaDibros, Aseret HaDvarim, the 10 Commandments are referred to as the Aseret HaDibros. They're not 10 Commandments, right? We mentioned we have more than 10 Commandments. We have a lot more, but these are the 10 things, or the 10 words, the 10 spoken things God tells us in the Aseret HaDibros. So those are called Dvarim. And then there are also Asara Ma'amaros, the 10 utterances, the 10 sayings. God creates the world with 10 Ma'amaros, 10 utterances. Vayomer Elokim, God speaks the world into existence, and the word used there for speaking the world into existence is Amira. Vayomer, he spoke. So the idea of Vayedaber is called Dvarim Leimer, is that Vayedaber, that when a person studies Torah, he can draw the Torah, he can draw the 10 Commandments, that says Dibris, or all of Torah, into Leimer, into the Asar Mamaris, into the world, so that it draws Torah down into this world when studying Torah. Those are the 3 interpretations of Leimer, and the Rebbe says that basically the word Leimer encapsulates the message of Mount Torah, because we know that the Jewish people were studying Torah also before Mount Sinai. So what happened? What changed at Mount Sinai? What was brought to the table that wasn't there before? What did we gain that we didn't have before? So the answer is Leimer. What was gained can be summarized in that one word Leimer. How? One of these 3 options. And the Rebbe is going to say, really, all 3 options. All 3 interpretations of Leimer, that is what happened at Mount Sinai. That prior to Mount Sinai, these were lacking. This idea that a Yid studies Torah and the Eibishter repeats it, or the idea that a Yid repeats the Eibishter studying Torah, or the idea of the power of drawing Torah into this world. All these 3 things are what the novelty and what happens at Mount Sinai that wasn't there prior. The Rebbe says we have to understand the connection between all these three things. They seem to be three different things. How they all come together. They almost seem like opposite things, some of them, but how do they all come together? So the Rebbe explains like this. He begins by introducing the Maimer of the Rebbe Marash. The Rebbe Marash also asks this question on the word Lamar. Interestingly, we'll find later, the Rebbe Marash doesn't really, he only offers one interpretation of Lamar. Only the Tan L'Shenim Resecha, only one interpretation of Lamar. He doesn't offer all three. That's not the subject of his Maimer. But he asks this question about Lamar, and he answers it, to get to it, to address it, he prefaces it with something else, which is another question. Anoichi Hashem Aleikecha. The opening of the Ten Commandments is, I am God, your God. So the question is, Anoichi Hashem Aleikecha, I am God, your God. Aleikecha is the singular. It's said in the singular. But we know that God is talking to everybody. So, right, and generally we find that when Hashem talks to everybody, to the plural, to a group, he says Aleikeichem. We say it in the Shema, Ni Hashem Aleikeichem. I am God, your God, Aleikeichem, in the plural. Why here is God saying Aleikecha in the singular? So the Rebbe Marash in his Maimer brings the commentary of the Yalkut Shemaini. Yalkut Shemaini says that why does it say Anochi Hashem Aleikecha, I am God, you God in the singular? Because every person had a personal experience at Mount Sinai. Everybody came away saying God spoke to me alone, spoke to me directly, to me personally. He also brings what the Medrash says, the Medrash Rabbah, that says that when God speaks, why does it say Aleikecha singular? Because God spoke to everybody on their level. So everybody was able to, he gave everybody what they were able to handle. So the bigger one would get more, the smaller one gets less, and so on. Everybody gets Lefi Koichan according to their capacity of how they can absorb the speech of the Eibishter. So the Rebbe says that the fact that the Rebbe Marash brings these two things, they seem to be the same thing in different words. The Yalkut Shemaini is saying, Imi Adibur Medaber, that God speaks to me personally. The Medrash Rabbah is saying everybody gets their personalized attention, that God sort of tailored his words to the amount that a person can get to what they have. It's essentially the same thing. So he says no. The reason he brings these two is to actually tell us something else, which is from the Yalkut Shemaini, that everybody comes away saying God spoke to me alone. You could say that was a soul experience. On a soul level, every soul was able to say that God spoke to me alone. But what about on a physical level? So here, that's why the Rebbe Marash adds the Medrash Rabbah. When you say the bigger one gets to his capacity, the smaller one to his capacity, the older to his capacity, the younger, we're older, younger, souls don't age. There are older souls, younger souls, bigger souls, smaller souls, the souls are all the same. Where are there differences? In our bodies, the way we are as people. And you have people age, and people are older, people are younger. So when the Rebbe Marash supplements this commentary with the words of the Medrash, it's to tell us that this experience of Anochi Hashem Aleikecha was also to Yid as he's in his body. Also, it was also a physical experience. Okay, that's going to set up what we want to talk about now. Then the next thing he says is what happens at Mount Sinai? What is the thing? What's the idea that Hashem has to speak to every person individually, to every single individual? What happened was at that moment when God says, Anochi Hashem Aleikecha, I am God, your God, he basically stamped his name into every single person. He put his name, he invested his name into everybody so that every single Yid could be called by God's name. What does this mean? So he brings a pasuk. Pasuk says, Ad naivam sineh b'kodesh. The pasuk is talking about angels. The pasuk in Tehillim where it talks about Jewish history, and part of it talks about about Mount Sinai. And it says, Rechav Elokim Riboisayim, Afeshinon, Ad Naibam, Sineh B'Kodesh. Ad Naibam, Sineh B'Kodesh. What does this mean? Ad Naibam, we're talking about angels. The Rechav Elokim Riboisayim, angels. And the angels are Ad Naibam. God's name is in them. So just as God's name is in the angels, so Sineh B'Kodesh, the same thing is that at Mount Sinai, at that moment, that sanctification that takes place at Mount Sinai is that God puts his name in the Jewish people. What does it mean that God's name is in the Malachim, in the angels? So he gives an example. All the angels are called by God's name. Raphael, Gavriel, Michael, those are the famous ones, we know them. Each one their names end with the word Kael, God's name. So God's name is within the angels. So the same is true with regard to the Jewish people, Yisrael, that God's name becomes part of who we are. What's the benefit of having God's name become part of who we are? So he explains, so the Rebbe Marash explains, the Rebbe doesn't go into detail here, but in his Maimer, the Rebbe Marash explains that angels, why are angels called by the name of God? What is the practical relevance of that, the significance of it? Is because angels are completely they're completely nullified to God. specifically when an angel is fulfilling God's mission, when an angel is given a mission by God to fulfill, so then also they're called by God's name. Why are they called by God's name? Because they're not themselves. All they feel is God. He gives an analogy. That's also why the angels are called Nune Yama. The angels are called the fish of the sea. Why are the angels compared to fish? So he explains over there that on land, everything on land comes from the land. But even though everything comes from the land, but on land, you don't. First of all, you don't depend on the land specifically. You depend on land in that we need food to nourish us. The food comes from the ground, but you don't feel that connection. You can also go times without actually eating. Not only that, you can even fly. You can get off the ground, so you're not literally attached and submerged in the ground. So you feel a disconnection. You feel disconnected from your source, which is the ground. But in the sea, that's not the case. Fish depend on the water for their survival. The moment they get out of the water, they die. They can't survive outside of the water. So they're always connected to their source. So they're submerged in their source, and they always feel that connection. They're never unaware and not mindful of that connection. The same is true with an angel. That angels are so aware of their connection to the Eibishter. They don't feel their independence. They don't feel independent because they're always connected. That's the power of the name of God that's invested in them. And the same idea is when you talk about a name. What's a name? A name it tells you about who you are. It expresses your identity. Is expressed in your name. So when I want to know who are you, I want to define you. I want to know who I'm talking about. So I call you by your name. When I call you by your name. That expresses you, right? Okay. So here's not the time to get into the whole idea of name and what the shortcomings of name. Point is that the name expresses you. That's who you are. Your name is tied to your identity. When an angel is called by the name of God, what does that mean? What's his identity? That he is totally submitted to God, submissive to God. So the same is true that at Mount Sinai, what happens? Adnai v'amsina, just as by the angels, God his name is in them. So the same happens at Mount Sinai, that God's name is invested in the Jew, and that causes that a Jew is totally submitted and surrendered to God. What that submission and surrender looks like, we're going to get to at the end of the Maimon. Chapter 9 will address what that means in more detail. But that's the point that we've said until now in chapters 1 and 2. And now let's move on to chapter 3. So, chapter 3. So, V'hinei, Shmoi shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu sheshitav b'Yisrael, hu l'mayla yosem mishmoi shemeshutav b'malachim. We have these two things. We have God's name as it's invested in the angels, and God's name as He invests it at Mount Sinai, at the giving of the Torah, in the Jewish people. So now the Rebbe says that when we're talking about the name of Hashem that's invested in the angels, and the name of Hashem that's invested in the Jewish people, as it's invested in the Jewish people is even greater, it's a higher level than what's invested in the Malachim, in the angels. Why? Because the Malachim ksiv Adnai bam. When it talks about angels, the verse we quoted from Tillim is Adnai bam. Adnai is Kimavur b'Tanya, Shamalachim nikreim b'Shem Elokim, that the angels, Tanya explains that the angels are called by the name Elokim. The Elokim v'Adnai and B'chlol in Yechad. Elokim and Adnai are generally one thing. Even though they're two different names, Elokim is Elokim, Adnai is Adnai. They are two distinct names, and yet generally they're the same, because Elokim, we know Elokim represents restriction, limitation. Elokim is Begematria Teva Elokim. God creates the world with the name Elokim. Elokim is Gevura, restriction, tzimtzum, concealment. That's Elokim. What's Adnai? The name Adnai comes from the word Adon, master, ruler. Ein melech b'lo am. In order to rule, you need to have people. So there has to be a creation. There have to be a people in order for you to rule over them. So we see that it's the same idea that Adnai or Adnus, that idea of leadership, of master. Being a master is a master over a subject, and the same is the idea of Elokim. That Elokim is the same idea of tzimtzum, of limitation, and where he goes to a certain point and not enough further. Okay, so Adnai and Elokim are generally one and the same concept. Aval b'Yisrael ksiv, but when it comes to the Jewish people, what name of Hashem is invested in the Jewish people? We know it says ki chelek ksiv ki chelek havaya amay. The chelek mishem havaya. It says that a Jew is a part of chelek havaya amay. That his people are part of havaya. Havaya, the name Yudke Vavke, the name Havaya. That's what's invested in the Jewish people. So they are part of Shem Havaya. So we see that the name of Hashem that's invested in the Jew is a higher name than the name that's invested in the angels. So what's the ramifications of that? The ramifications of that would be, we'll finish at the end, that ultimately the higher the name, the greater the bittul, the greater the submission. But we see the idea that the name of Hashem that's invested in the Jew is a higher name, on a higher level than the name that's in the angels. So this idea of Chelek Havaya Amoy also existed before Mount Sinai. The neshama is a part of Havaya. That's where it comes from. That's its source. That wasn't something that started at Mount Sinai. There were souls before, and those souls were a part of Havaya. So So we're saying that Adnai Vamsina Bakodesh, at Mount Sinai, that's when the name Havaya comes into the. God invests His name in the Jewish people. Which name Havaya? But so, the Rebbe is asking, that already existed before. That's not something that started at Mount Sinai. So what are you saying that this happens at Mount Sinai? So he says, but nevertheless, before Mount Torah, Lo Yeheir Ze Begilui Kol Kach. It wasn't fully revealed before Mount Sinai. Because when we say Chelek Havaya Amay, when we say that my people are part of Havaya, what are we talking about? What's the part of Havaya? The neshama, the soul. Right? So we read this in neshama lamata, and when the neshama comes down into the body, Haguf Mailam Master al neshama. Val Shem Havaya Sheba. What happens when the soul comes into the body? The body conceals the soul, and conceals not only the soul, but also the aspect of the soul that is that the soul is a part of Havaya. So we're explaining the whole idea of God's name being invested in something. That your name includes within it Havaya. God invests His name in you. That means that what? That it affects, just as we said about the angels. Why are the angels called by the name of Havaya? Because they feel nullified. They feel totally surrendered. They don't feel separate from Hashem. So the neshama, the neshama is Chelek Havaya, meaning that the neshama is batal, is nullified to the Eibishter, nullified to God. But when it comes into the body, do you feel that? You don't feel it. So therefore, it's concealed.
I thought we said the body is hosting it, not concealing it.
We'll get there. Okay, we're working our way towards that. So we see that the body conceals it. So then ultimately, it's concealing the name. So then you're not, even though it's called by the name, but you don't have the ramifications of it, the result of it, which is that feeling of submission. But what happens at Mount Sinai is that through Hashem saying, I am God, your God, that Havaya becomes Elekecha. That the Havaya, the name Havaya, which is a part of the neshama, that's a part of the person, that now becomes Elekecha, becomes your own experience. So now that it is revealed that the body no longer conceals it. What does this mean? The Pirush Anoichi Havaya Lekechahu. What is the meaning of Anoichi Havaya Lekecha? I am God, your God. That Havaya Yemeir Mizgala B'cha Kol Kach Achi Nikra Al Shmecha Elekecha. The Alter Rebbe explains in Likutei Torah that what does it mean when we say that when God says Elekecha? This is another interpretation. We're saying Anoichi Havaya Lekecha. We said before, what does that mean? That every person said it was a personal experience. So here we're saying Elekecha. You're calling the Eibishter your God. He's my God. What makes him mine? Mine personally, I take ownership almost over him. What does that mean? That because he's a noichi havaya, but Mount Sinai, what does God do? He brings the havaya into a place within the person that he could say that havaya is Elekecha, he's mine. It's not abstract, it's not concealed, he's mine. So how is it that havaya could become Elekecha? That even after the neshama is now enclosed in a body, which as we said before, the body conceals the neshama, and therefore conceals the havaya, the chelek havaya amay of the neshama. How is it possible that now, after Mount Torah, that the neshama could come into the body and the body will not conceal it, and it should be revealed? To the point not only that it's not concealed, but that's your definition, that's your name, that's how you're defined. So that power comes from that comes from the essence of God that's higher than Havaya. Meaning, when he says Anoichi represents the level of God's essence. Anoichi, that's beyond name. I is beyond any name. So Havaya is already a name of God. So when Anoichi, the power for Havaya to become Elekecha, the power that the name of Havaya, which Havaya is concealed by the body, for that to still shine in the body and still be revealed within the body, that ability comes from Anoichi. From the essence of God, that's higher than Havaya and so it's higher than the body, higher than the soul, it's higher than all of it, and it could therefore invest it into the body in a way that the body doesn't conceal it. So the Rebbe explains, the Shem Havaya mitzad atzmoi, the name Havaya on its own, Hagili shelo yulamayla dafke. Havaya could be revealed in Havaya is spiritual, and therefore could be revealed in spiritual realms. But when it comes to the physical, it's concealed. That's not its domain. In order for the Havaya, which is a spiritual thing, which is revealed in the spiritual realms, for it to be down here in a revealed manner in the physical body, it comes from the power of essence of God, which is higher than all of it, which is higher than even Havaya. Havaya is, in a sense, confined to spirituality. And so therefore, it went before Matan Torah, the soul was taka, chelek Havaya Ama, it had this attachment to Havaya, but when the soul comes into the body concealed it. It remained like a separate domain. They remained two separate, distinct entities. There's the body and there's the soul. They weren't compatible. At Mount Sinai, when Anoichi is introduced, when God reveals His essence, revealing His essence, which is higher than the spirituality and the physicality, the spirituality of Havaya and the physicality of the body, that Havaya could bring, that Anoichi, that essence of Hashem, could bring Havaya into the body and still have it revealed. Why? Because as we see, the Kol HaGavoya Yoseh, the principle that anything that's greater, Yered Mizgal Lamata Yoseh, can be revealed lower. So this then is the meaning of Anoichi Havaya Lekecha. The essence of God is Havaya, makes Havaya. So it's as if the opening word of the first commandment of the Aseret Sedibros, Anoichi Havaya Lekecha, basically we can understand it like this: that Anoichi, the essence of Hashem, is now revealed, and that causes that Havaya, the level of God that's transcendent, that's in the spiritual realms, that was previously hidden, should come down even into the physical world, to the extent that a person could say, Elekecha, me, as I'm living in the physical world, the soul in my body, can call him mine. I identify with that definition of myself, which is the Havaya. How can Havaya end up in being Elekecha? How can Havaya that's transcendent, that's spiritual, end up being Elekecha in the physical body? Because of Anoichi. Anoichi, which is higher than both of them, can bring it in. He brings this example, the concept that something that's higher can come lower. So the fact that so in other words, when we talk about, we're going to finish that off in the next paragraph here, we'll bring a full circle as it relates back to the Malachim, to the angels. But the point is here that since Anoichi is higher than all of it, it then could come even lower. Just the concept, the principle of something higher coming something lower, that generally you have brought to this the idea of the wall. You have a brick wall, so when the wall collapses, the higher up the bricks are, the further they fall away from the base of the wall. They can go further. In the Maimer there, Marashi brings an example of Re'iyah and Shmiya, that seeing and hearing, which is a topic we talked about. Actually, we talked about seeing and hearing last year before Shavuos, where we learned the Sicha on Shavuos. So we're talking also about the difference of Re'iyah and Shmiya, seeing and hearing. Remember the Hein Lav Lav Sicha. So, what's a greater power, seeing or hearing? So he explains sight is a higher power than hearing. Why? Why is it a greater power? Because we see when a person listens to something, when you hear something, you can understand it on one level, but when you see it, it takes it to a whole other level. The experience is an entirely different one. But not only seeing is believing. When you see, you can hear something, you construct an image in your mind, but then when you see it, it's a whole other level. So we see that seeing is more powerful than hearing. It's a stronger power. And yet, even though the power, the ability to see is greater than the ability to hear, and yet you hear something spiritual and you could see something physical. Seeing is expressed specifically in a physical thing. We talked about this last year a little bit. So we see that the power of sight, it's not a contradiction. Because the power of sight is a higher power than the power to hear, so therefore as they're expressed, as they manifest themselves in the physical experience, the power of seeing comes down lower than the power of hearing. That the power of hearing, you can only hear sound. But seeing, you can actually see the physical things. You actually absorb something physical through things. So we see that something that's higher can come lower. So Havaya on its own can't come down into the body and be revealed. It's only through Anoichi, the essence of Hashem, that's higher than it, you introduce a higher power that then can bring it even into a lower place. Okay. So V'yashleimar, we can say that the Kivan Sheshmai Shal Kadosh Baruch Hu Sheshitav B'Yisrael Hu Shem Havai Shalamayim Mishem Adnai Shem Meshutav B'Malachim. So we can say that since what name of Hashem that is invested in the Jewish people, and versus the Malachim is that Shem. The name that's invested in the Jew is Havaya, whereas in the Malachim it's the name Adnai. The sheet of Shmai B'Yisrael, especially if we consider the whole introduction we just gave in the second part here of the first paragraph, which is that in order for Havaya to be revealed in the person at Mount Sinai, how'd that happen? By introducing the essence of Hashem that's even higher than Havaya. So therefore, lachein, we can say that gam habitul di Yisrael shenasa idei Shema Yisbarach hameshutav behem hu bitul gadol yoser mebitul hamalachim. So we can say that what's the whole point, as we explained earlier? What's the whole point that we say that the malach is called by the name of Hashem? What's the practical ramification of it? That the angel is batul, is nullified to God, is submitted to God. He doesn't feel separate. So that would follow then, the greater the name of God that's invested in you, the more submitted you are, the more batal. So therefore, number one, we're saying that the name of Hashem that's in the Jew versus is higher than the one in the angel. So that's number one, that there's an advantage. What name is invested in the angel? Adnai, which is like Elokim, it's a lower name. Havai, which is higher, is invested in the Jew, so it's a higher name. Not only is it higher, that there's a higher name of God, the name Havaya, that's invested in the Jew, but also the fact that it's invested in the Jew as he's even in the body, meaning that at Mount Sinai it was revealed that the body is no longer concealing it. That's because it was introduced by the idea of the essence of Hashem, Havaya, of Anoichi, which is even higher than Havaya. So we see that the Jew has Havaya invested in him, and the fact that it is not concealed by the body is because of the essence is even higher than Havaya. So the Jew is, let's call it 2 stages higher than the angel. Both the name is higher, and the fact that the name is impactful is from something even higher than that. And it would follow, since it's a higher name that's invested, so too, the impact is a greater one. That the bittul that is caused because of the higher name of Havaya that's invested in the Jew is more surrendered, more submitted to the Eibishter, has more bittul to the Eibishter than the angels. Now obviously this would require some kind of explanation, commentary, and that, like I mentioned, we'll get to later. So we'll clarify this all later on. Towards the end of the Maimon, everybody's going to return to this idea. What does it mean? What's the bittul that happens as a result of this Havaya? But the point that he's making is that the bittul is greater. So there's a greater bittul that happens in the Jew as a result of Havaya being attached to him than the bittul that the angels have from the name Adnai that they're associated with.
The angel isn't choosing; it's programmed, right? I mean, it's
right. Right. Okay. So that's but that's not. We're not going to get into that now. The nature of the bittul. That's for later. We'll leave it for later. Chapter 4. Yeah. So far so good, right? Okay. So the Inyan Shem Havaya Sheb'Cholachad Yisrael Mevayer Ba'Maimer. What does it mean practically, or in the words of the Rebbe Marash in his Maimer in Avodah? What does it mean practically when we say that the name Havaya is invested in the Jew? Right. So we said Yisrael. You have the name Kael in right, in the name. You have it also in Malachim. So that's like technically how that appears. But what does it mean that the name of Havaya is invested in the Jew? So he says like this. So Mevayer Ba'Maimer there, Marash explains in his Maimer, Shahayud Shem Havaya Sheb Yisrael Yachachma Sheb Nefesh. When we say the name Havaya, which is that's the highest name of Hashem. Obviously, the essence of Hashem is beyond even name. But the highest name, because there are many, many names, he has many names, he's called by many names, and within each name also has many levels and aspects to the names. The highest name is the name Havaya, Yud Kei Vav Kei, the 4-letter name of Hashem that we don't even pronounce. Right? We don't pronounce that name. It's so high. The name Havaya is made up of 4 letters, Yud and a Hey, and a Vav and a Hey. Those are the 4 letters, Yud Kei Vav Kei. So, Yud Kei Vav Kei, what is that? That's the name of Havaya that's stamped in the soul of every Yid. How do you see that effect as stamped in the soul of every Yid? How do you see that in the person's makeup? So he says like this: the Yud of Havaya, that's the Chachma of the Nefesh, and the soul has Chachma, the level of Chachma. Chachma is the Kuda point, right? Just a flash of an idea. So that's Chachma, just as the Yud, which the Yud is a dot. That's the Yud is a point, a dot. V'ahei d'shem Havaya hu habina shebenefesh. The Hey of Havaya, the first Hey, that's the level of Bina, of understanding. What's Bina? Is Lahavin Davar Mitaych Davar. The idea of Bina, the Gemara says, Bina means Lahavin Davar Mitaych Davar, to understand one thing from another. In other words, to be able to infer, read something and be able to read into it and understand the implications of it. I see this statement, and from this statement I can understand another concept, right? Lahavin Davar Mitaych Davar. So Chassidus explains what's the meaning of Lahavin Davar Mitaych Davar. The Rebbe Marash also explains this at length in his Maimer. That V'toich Davar hu advar Havaya shemislabish b'teich hanivraim. when we say that bina of the soul, so the idea of chachma, he only explains for some reason here the idea of bina. He doesn't explain the other ones here in Rebbe in his Maimer. But what's the idea? So chachma is just the idea, the kernel. That's the dot. That's yud. Hey is bina. Bina is lahavin davar mitoich davar. So what does it mean? So he says like this. Well, let's talk about it outside, and we'll read it inside. And this we'll appreciate something we learned actually in the previous Maimer, the Maimer Ki Sholcha Bincha, that we learned not long ago. There's the Dvar Hashem, the word of Hashem that is invested in everything in creation, right? We know the Baal Shem Tov says it's a medrash, and the Alter Rebbe quotes the Baal Shem Tov the first parak of Sha'ar Yichud V'Amunah. L'olam dvarcha nitzav b'shamayim. That we say the word of Hashem is always stands in the heavens. So the Baal Shem Tov explains what does it mean that the Dvar Hashem, the word of Hashem, is always in the heavens. So we have the Dvar Hashem, meaning Hashem speaks the world into creation. Those words, those utterances that He speaks into creation, that is the Dvar Hashem that creates everything, that brings everything into existence. So Baal Shem Tov explains the Olam nitzav b'shamayim. It's constantly that the word of Hashem is constantly creating everything by constantly speaking it into existence. So what does that mean? That there's the word of Hashem that's invested within every creation. That word that's invested in creation is a limited divine energy. It's an energy that's limited to that specific thing and is invested within that specific thing. If it's invested in it, then it's limited to the parameters, to the dimensions of that thing. Now, so there's the word of Hashem that's invested, there's the creative energy that's invested within creation. What happens when you reflect on this idea that everything here is created, meaning that there's a creative energy within it, that leads you to the conclusion that there's a creator that's even beyond creation. So that's the meaning of lahavin davar mitoich davar. When I reflect on the toich davar, I reflect, or the davar that's toich davar, read it the other way. The davar that's toich, I reflect on the davar, the word of Hashem, that's toich, that's within creation, that animates everything in creation. I understand from there, I come to an understanding of the other davar, the davar that I get to mitoich the davar. That from that I get, or the words he uses in the Maimer, that are words similar to what we explained, the words we used in Ki Sholcha, that a person can have an understanding of Mimala Kol Almin, the imminent presence of God, the creative energy that's present in creation, and through understanding Mimala Kol Almin, whatever that means, to understanding the divine energy that creates, that's already also requires what exactly that means. But still, we can understand that, we can comprehend on some level that the divine energy that's invested in creation, Mimala Kol Almin, and from that we can come to recognize that there's also Seiv of Kol Almin. We can reach Seiv of Kol Almin. So Bina, Hey, the letter Hey also is the Kuda Behei Chalav. You have the dot that's then in the chamber. Yud is a dot. Hey has parameters. It's got, as we discussed in the Basi Laganis, it's got lines, it's got dimensions. So Yud is the kernel, that's the Chachma, and Bina is the dimensions, understanding it, developing it. So when a person uses his Bina, he can develop this idea. He can understand Mimala Kol Almin. From Mimala Kol Almin, he can then come to understanding, recognizing, or reaching that level, accessing the idea of Seiv of Kol Almin. So that's Lav and Davar Mitoich Davar, that's Bina. The parameters, the dimensions, the expansion of Bina. So let's see. So it's like this. Hey, the Shem Havaya, what's the Hey of Shem Havaya who are Bina Shabenefesh? That's already Bina, where it already is broadened. The Yud is now developed and broadened. Lahav and Davar Mitoich Davar, to understand one thing from another. The Toich Davar who Hadvar Havaya Shem Eslabish B'Tech Anavroim. What's the Toich Davar? What's the Davar that's Toich, that's inside, that's the word of Hashem that's invested within creation, that's always speaking everything into existence. Kipir Shabal Shem Tov al Pasuk, like the explanation of the Baal Shem Tov in the verse Elokim Vayedaber Nitzvah Shemaim, that God's words are forever standing in the heavens. And Baal Shem Tov explains that means that the word of Hashem is constantly invested in every creation. So the davar, what's the davar that you're understanding from this toich davar? Who had dibur she'atzmei shalamayla me'islav shalam nivraim. The word itself that's beyond what's enclosed in the nivraim. The b'cholos or era seiv. Generally, that we'd refer to that in Chassidic terminology as the transcendent light. This is the meaning of understanding one thing from another. Shaideya is banus badvar havaya. Toich davar, through reflection and contemplation in the word of Hashem that's invested within creation, the Toich davar shehu ha'ara bilvad, which is only an infusion. It's only an external dimension of the actual word of Hashem itself. And that's apparent. The mere fact that it's invested in creation, that tells us that it's only an infusion of it. It's not the thing itself, because God Himself is infinite. So the fact that it comes to something finite means that it's a lesser or more external aspect. So from that, we can come to a conclusion from that there's a davar, there's a thing, there's a word of Hashem that's beyond even what could be invested within creation. That's the source from which we get the word that is then invested within Hashem. So that's the Yud and the Hey, the first Yud and the first Hey. Or the Yud and the first Hey. Vav, which is Amshacha, Vav, the Vav is a movement downward. Vav represents drawing down. So that is Midas. What are emotions? Emotions are born from the intellect. The person contemplates and thinks and has this idea, or goes from the Chachma. He then comes to the Bina, to understanding, and as a result of that comes the Vav. He then has a feeling about it. You start to develop a relationship with the Eibusher, feelings towards the Eibusher. So Vav is the Midas, and the Vav is also the numerical value of 6, which is the 6 emotions. What's the final Hey of the Yud Kei Vav Kei? That is Kabbalah soil. That represents Malchus. That represents the idea of submission to then actually serve God. So there's the Yud. So we see how Yud Kei Vav Kei is stamped in the soul. The soul has Chachma, that corresponds to the Yud. The soul's Bina, the capacity to comprehend, to come to know God, that's the Hey. Then the feelings that the soul develops towards God, that's the Vav. And Kabbalah soil, submission to the Eibusher, to do what he says, to be submitted to the Eibusher, that's the final Hey of Shem Havaya. So we see how Yud Kei Vav Kei is invested in practical terms, how that applies or is stamped in the soul of man. And then I was going to continue how this applies even to the body, but that we'll have to leave already, I think, for the next class. We'll continue from Mamshach.